Linden on this fine election day. I do hope you've all had your democracy sausage or your cupcake or whatever else you may have acquired as part of the adventure of today. My name is Linden Martin and I'm the Gallery Director at Linden New Art. Today it's a great pleasure to introduce you to the fabulous Cyrus Tang, who is sitting next to me here. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Boonwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Red Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and also to their emerging leaders. Today draws upon the ancient tradition of our First Nations people of gathering together, of sharing stories, talking about art, making art, singing and dancing. So with that great tradition that is 65,000 years old in this country, we're on that together. But let me introduce you to Cyrus. I think I first met Cyrus in this gallery, even though I had known her work for a number of years prior, when she came with a group of other artists, which is affectionately known as the Asian Art Gang. It's their own self-titled group. And I just happened to be sitting, I was filling in for someone's lunch and I was sitting down, I'm like, excuse me, but are you Cyrus Tang? She's like, yes I am. And then she was with Bibu Shugalasa, who we've shown a little while ago. And I'm trying to think, what's the third? Owen, who lives in Sydney. Yep. So that was my first kind of meeting. But let me tell you a little bit about Cyrus. She lives in Melbourne. She actually lives in the suburb that I grew up in, so I feel like, she's got a lot, she's going to go far in the world. She's an artist who works across photography, sculpture and installation, and your practice really is concerned with the human experience of memory and forgetting and absence and presence and loss and resurrection. Born in Hong Kong, you make the big brave move to come to Australia in 2003. You hold an honours degree, and I think it was with 45 boxes that you came to Australia with, is that right? I am currently packing up my own apartment at the moment and I'm up to 82, so I'm like, wow, she is a Marie Kondo master. You hold an honours degree in Fine Arts from the Victorian College of the Arts and a Masters of Fine Arts from Monash University. You've undertaken residencies around the world, including one of my favourite places in Finland, South Korea, France and Canada. Your work's been shortlisted for numerous prestigious awards, including the Sovereign Asian Art Prize in Hong Kong in 2021, the William and Winifred Bonus Prize at Monash Gallery of Art in 2020, and you were awarded the McClellan National Sculpture Prize in 2020. So an illustrious career, she says, she smiles. Tell me about this work, because this body of work was made in a particular time that we've all experienced. How did you make this work?
Yeah, and then if some of the people are familiar with my work, and so actually I study sculpture, and so photography is very new medium to me. And I guess it's one of my training is just saying about it doesn't matter what kind of skill that you have. The main thing is about the concept. Once you got the concept, and then you just use your medium and then to achieve your purpose. And that is my training in my uni. And so that is the, and so in the past, and I make a lot of sculpture, and I did some of the photograph and video based on the sculpture. And however, because of the, my studio, first of all, my studio is 39K from my home. And then once I told you about this 39K from home, and then you know what's happening for my life in the last 2 years during the lockdown. And so I just cannot go back to the studio because it's illegal, because it will break the law. And then in the meantime, I don't feel I'm very comfortable to go back to the studio. And so, and then suddenly I feel like I have plenty of time, and then I don't have a studio. And so all I got is just a camera. And then with some 1 hours go out, and that's it. I think that is the life that most of the people experience, and then in the last 2 years. And so I used that time and then to just really think about, I think it's because when the time you have plenty of time, and then you start to think about a lot of things. And then I use that time to think about, why I moved to Australia. And then and then I start to miss a little bit of my home, Hong Kong. And then I start to pay attention to the Australia landscape. What is the difference? And then compare with my home, Hong Kong. And then I start to make a lot of association and compare difference. And then I must say, and then I start to really pay attention to the landscape. And in the last 2 years. And that is the story starting from. Yep.
So these particular works along here are really your experience of really seeing the changing seasons. Like I think, I in my neighbourhood discovered the lady who had the pomegranate tree, the people who were stealing lemons off someone's back tree, all those things that you notice because you are walking during the day that you might not normally do because you're often at work or you would be in the studio. Tell me about these works in terms of your response to nature, because I think that's a really interesting story in these works.
Thank you. So I guess it's when the time you go out and then walk a lot, and then you start to observe the landscape, and then you start to observe particularly the changes, and then there is something is really appeal to me, and then it's like the tree, and then sometimes the tree is cut like this. Around the power lines. I found out, oh my God, what on the earth? And the people were going to cut the tree like this. And so I understand the reasons behind, because I'm an immigrant, and then in Hong Kong we don't cut the tree like this. And that is something is fascinating to me. And then sometimes, because I'm living in Vermont, and then the beauty about that is because they have tree everywhere. And of course, there are power poles everywhere as well, the power cable. And so that's why I start to observe about the changes. And then particular for the lockdown days, and we all go through about the summer, autumn, and then there is some changes. And then in terms of the tree and the whole landscape, and I start to take a lot of photographs. And when the time I got all this photograph, and then I start to really think about what I'm going to do with all this photograph. And because all I got is just a camera together with the computer. And that is all I got at home. And I don't have a lot of tools. And then, so that's why, and I start to think about, what can I do with all this? And a lot of my practice is about how to make a dialogue in between the past and the present. And then I find it out in these 2 years, for me, is very interesting. And I don't particularly think about is really like a bad experience. Because for me, and then I find it out, I might lose something, but in the meantime, I gain something. Like for instance, I find it out I have a little bit more connection with my family, and I start to having connection with my neighborhood, which is I would never pay attention to it. And I live in Vermont for 7 years, and I must say, I never really pay attention to any supermarket around my area. And then I start to pay attention with my neighborhood, and I start to say hi with some people walking past. And so that is something which is I will never do, and then without the lockdown. And so I think that kind of appreciation is kind of quite unique to me, and then to link up with that unique landscape. And so that is the reason why I start to observe about the changes, and I start to take picture. And then first of all is to see what is the difference, what is my eyes as an immigrant, and then to see about this landscape. And to me it's different. And because in Hong Kong, our sky is not that big. And Australia's sky is really big. and our sky, we doesn't have a lot of cables. Because we're running by apartment. And then our power line is running. Yes, that's very true. It's very low. And then Australia have a really big power cable and a very small house. And then suddenly I feel like the power cable is become like a sculpture. It's just standing up. And then in Hong Kong, it's not like this. And so I think it's like, I never seen the tower in my whole life. And then until I moved to Australia. And so something like this, I never really pay attention to it. I guess it's because the lockdown made me feel everything is a bit more unique. And yeah, yes.
One of the things that's been really fascinating for us watching audience members come in and visit the show is just how people have responded to your work. One person has described it as almost like watercolours, like they talked about it being like a Turner painting, that really foggy, misty kind of landscape that you get in the UK. Other people have talked about, and they use this great term of the screaming emptiness, that we all, when we experience that like collective, very unusual experience of being in lockdown, that there was a kind of quietness that descended into our suburbs. How do you feel about that when people describe your work like that? That is really touching feedback. Thank you. So I think I feel like the same. And at the beginning of the lockdown, that kind of emptiness, and then I kind of quite enjoy it. And then the first period of the lockdown, and then I intentionally to go out, and then to enjoy that kind of surreal emptiness. No people around in the street, and then the emptiness of the Canterbury Road, which is so spacious. And then you walk into the, at the first period of the lockdown, we can still go out for a little bit. And then I managed to sneak out to the city, and then you can feel about the quietness in the city. And so something I found out is kind of quite nice. And to be honest, and a lot of people might go into punch in my head, oh, you can't say that. And so, and I think it's, and then after a little while, and then I must say, and then, and then I start to feel a little bit, oh God, when is it going to end? When is it going to end? And then I start to realize, and then my emotional stage is having some kind of changes. And so, that is a very interesting psychology for me. And so when the time I make this photograph, and then I found out my psychology is changing together with the photograph as well. And then at a certain point, I have to force myself, and then to leave the house, and then to take a photograph. And and so because you got a goal you need to do. I think that some people, they might share the same feeling about the strangeness of the lockdown. I think it's really interesting because I felt like I spent a lot of time looking up at the sky. And almost like I wanted to see that the world was bigger than the small world I felt that I had. So if we look at this, the work that here is kind of, I guess, really tells something of a process. It's like a sculptural work. And it also tells the process of how you made many of the photographs with almost like 1,000 images that you've then kind of extracted down and crashed your computer 1,000 times to do. Can you talk us through this kind of work here, the blue with the sort of sky that you can kind of see through and see the graduating changes?
Oh, thank you. So actually, this is my last work that I make. Because when the time Linden asked me to have a show, we're still not quite sure whether we can show it in a physical space, and then or if we can get a physical ordinance, and then to actually see the show. And so, and then because of the lockdown, and then I cannot get a lot of material, and then pretty much, and then I got the idea, and then once they eased the lockdown, and then I really want to try to make it work. Because I'm a sculptor, and then I start to think about, because most of my, first of all, most of my photograph is based on the layering of my everyday experience. And so, and then towards the end, and I'm thinking about how can I transform about this experience into like a sculpture. And then I start to think about, because of our sky is so amazing, and then I start to having a goal to myself. oh, I'm going to observe the sky, and then from 8 a.m., 6 a.m., and then to 9 p.m. And I doing it during the summertime. And then to see what is the difference. And then I just going out and every day and different period of time, and then to take a lot of photograph. And then each perspective, and then it's particular 1 hour and time frame, and then you start from 6 a.m. at the end is the 9 p.m. And then they lay up hundreds of the photograph. And so what I want to show is the changes of the sky and that we all experience, and then to see the color changes. Because I'm not quite sure whether you notice, actually, our sky is pink. And in Hong Kong sky, they're orange. Yeah, and it's very different color. And then for me, I found it out, it's very fascinating. Oh my God, pink sky, and it's so pretty. And so, yeah, and I think that is my final stage. I really want to show the experience and then to transform into a physical world. Yep.
So if you go back to these photographs, there's layers and layers and layers of photographs. What was the process that you went through to create the layering effect? What was the kind of technique that you're using, and how are you selecting them? Because in this image you can see the edge of multiple photographs, but in the image is sort of on the other side of the world. You can't see the edge, so you don't know how many layers there are.
Yeah. So all the framework actually is the first series of the photograph that I made, which is at that time is 2020. And so at that time, for me, it's very new and very fascinating. And then, because when the time I take a photograph, and then, oh, what I'm going to do with it? Because I'm holding my camera all the time. And after a while, because through the camera, and then you just draw into another world, and then you start to obsess with certain kind of object and certain compositions, which is really fascinate me. And then after I have that, I find out, oh, very often I take the photograph is based on some motive, and then based on certain compositions. And then there's certain kind of similarity. And then I start to play around with it on the computer, because this is all I got, it's just a computer at home. And with a TV, of course. And then I play around at home and I find it out. And so, oh, what if I'm lay up about all these images? And then after I lay up, and I find out, oh, and then suddenly it's become a little bit like a drawing and a painting. And so, because I am a sculptor, and then in the 20 years, and then I always have a little joke, and I always want to paint. And I always want to draw, and I have a sketchbook, and which is totally blank, and it's very nice, white, nothing. Yes. And then I bought a canvas, and then for 15 years, and then it's still live in my studio, and then I'm thinking about one day I'm going to paint, and I still haven't started because I'm getting very nervous, and I just don't know how to start. I guess I think that is my little funny experience towards painting, because I don't know what to do with it. And but when the time I go into the computer, I find out, oh my God, suddenly I can use the computer to paint, and I can use the computer to draw. And I found out that process is very interesting to me. And then so that is the reason why I start to play around, and then to see what is coming up. And sometimes it doesn't work, and then if it doesn't work, and then you just park the file, and then some of the work you find it out, ooh, that is interesting, and then you just continue to play around with it. And when the time I did it, and then I start to have a little bit tennis elbow, and I still got it, and then I must say, and then I change all my gear, and change my table, and then now I change my computer, and then to kind of working towards that new medium. Yeah.
I want to talk about the title of the exhibition, because it's a really poetic title. Time fell asleep in the evening rain. How did you come up with that?
First of all, most of my work is about time, Yeah, if you are aware about my video and then my book sculpture, and so time is I always find out is very fascinating to me, especially in the last 2 years. And then I found it out time to me is really surreal. It looks like it doesn't move. But when the time you ask me about, oh, what has been happening in the last 2 years? And actually, I almost forgot about, what I have been doing in the last 2 years. You feel like you have been done a lot. But in the meantime, I doesn't feel like I'm doing a lot. Because everyone might feel that the same. Because we all go to the supermarket every day and then do a little bit shopping and then go out and then to get that kind of routine. And then suddenly your time is just become very strange. And then for me, it's like stop. And the other thing I'm very fascinated about is the multiple reasons about rain. Because it can be very refreshing. But some people, they find it out is very miserable. They have a multiple meaning. And then I think it's everyone coming through this lockdown, my experience about the same. Okay, let's start it over. And then let's move on. But the questions that I'm asking myself, and then how I'm going to move on, what I'm going to carry to move on. Because I always share about the experience when the time they start the pandemic, I'm thinking of the SARS, and then in 2003 in Hong Kong, and which is not many people remember because it's just only in Hong Kong they experience about that death. And so I managed to walk away from it because that is the year that I moved to Australia, and then 2 months, and then after that, and then the SARS break out in Hong Kong, and then I was worried about my family, and I found out after 20 years, and then that is the pandemic, and so it felt like it's like a history. It's just like in a circle. Yeah, and then I feel like, okay. And then we all walk through this, and then I find out it's important for us to remember this experience, and so that we can continue to move on. Yeah.
I find it really interesting talking to my nephew who's 10, and recently he looked at me and he said, Mel, what was it like when you were growing up in a pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I didn't have that experience. This is my first experience too. So it's really interesting how kids, I think, are processing this as well as adults. And I feel like time got very blurry. I also feel like my private life and my work life collapsed together. I did events from my bedroom. I opened exhibitions from my bedroom. It felt like suddenly there was this normally a very personal private space became a much more public space. So there's a really interesting tension in that.
Yeah,
I
agree.
divided the rooms and the galleries into sort of two spaces with some work that's behind us. And I want you to talk about the work that's above the fireplace in the other room and how you made that work. Because I think once you start talking about that work, you see the image very differently from when you first look at it.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that work.
That work actually is my final work, and also my first work that I start. Because when the time I first start the work is because I start to because of the SARS, and then they start to day back in February. All my friends come to Australia and then to have a visit, and then they start to collect about the mask in the pharmacy, and so they because in Hong Kong is already running off masks, and then there is a panicking about buying the mask. And then at that time, I don't even know what is going on. Why we need to wear the mask? And then at the end of March, and then we start to have an outbreak. And I start to observe. I think everyone is the same, and I look at the internet to see what is happening. And then I start to collect a lot of images. And then I start to play around. That is the first photograph, and I start to play around. And then start from SARS, and then from the pandemic all around the world. And the photograph for me never going right. And then I have at least 5 different editions. it just felt like, oh my God, it's all wrong. It's just, I showed it to some of my friends, it's just, wasn't quite right. And then, so suddenly, and so when the time, you guys asked me to have a show, and I never really showed these images, and then to Juliet, which is she is the curator. And then 2 weeks before we finalized the show, and suddenly I talked to Julia, I really want to add this photograph because I continue to play around. And suddenly one day I found out, oh my God, it got something. And then so actually it's a combination of 1,000 of the photograph of all these people, they wear masks and walking on the street. And so I found out it's amazing, and then about all these kind of people, and then in Japan, in Hong Kong, life as usual, because they have to, we have to, and then we just wear masks and then walking on, and then to me it's like a soldier, and then fighting towards the pandemic, and then which is like an invisible war, and so we all wear the mask, and then but when the time you build up all these images, and then I show it to my friend. What is this? And then there's a little watermark in there. And I said, oh my God, it's a soldier. And I try to explain to everyone. No one really know what I'm talking about. And I found out, oh, that is really interesting. And then about the abstract photograph, because actually is when the time all this information overlap, and then you start to create another images, which is open up another imagination. And then it's same with this photograph. And so I'm fascinated because when the time the detail of the photograph build up together, and then it turn into a absent state. And so that kind of the dialogue in between the present and the absent, a lot of information, and then turn into no information. And then that process is really fascinating to me. And that is, I find that is my final product of the entire show.
And it's a really beautiful work because it takes a while for people to actually see what it really is. So it almost looks like someone emerging from a foggy day out of like the pea soup fog of the UK or something.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting image. This exhibition is part of the Photo 2022 Festival, which has been all around Melbourne. Lots of people will have seen some of the billboards and the works that are hanging around, particularly in the city of Melbourne, as well as some exhibitions. The theme is called Being Human. And when I look at these works, there's a lot of absence, and yet here you are as a human making the work. Tell me about how you think your work responds to that theme of being human.
I think for me, being human is just, I really want to share is the common experience. And then I don't think this experience is unique about it's just only me. And then when the time I share with a lot of my friends, and actually everyone share about in the last 2 years, and then that kind of repetition about life, that kind of the new routine. Every day is the same, 1 hour. Or let's go out for a walk, 1 hour exercise, and then 1 hour go to medical appointment, and then supermarket, and then online telehealth, and then that kind of unique routine, and then is everyone experience about that. And so I think it's that kind of repetition, and then is part of the human being that we all experience, and then it's just like the past 2 years is a new routine. And so it's absence, but in the meantime, I found it out because it's share of everyone, of the journey in the last 2 years.
It's a really beautiful body of work. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to open it up to everyone here. Does anyone else got a burning question? I've got a few more up my sleeve in case it goes very quiet. But does anyone else have another question they'd like to ask? Leo.
Always do. The focus of the work on that idea of like us returning to the local, to the neighbourhood, there's been a lot of positives I think that have come out of that. It's kind of like an old world way of thinking against localisation. As we're coming out of the lockdown period, fingers crossed, do you think that will stay? Do you think people will stay engaged with the neighbourhood?
that is a good question. I asked about the same questions before, and then I can share about there is a funny story in my neighborhood during the lockdown, and there is a coffee shop and then open around my neighborhood. When the time that coffee shop start, and then I'm talking to my neighborhood, so oh God, what on the earth? And then having a coffee shop in the middle of nowhere, and then how is it going to survive? And then a friend of mine, she has been living in Vermont for over 30 years. She shared, you never know. And then in Vermont, and then every local, they support the local. And then that coffee shop, I was so surprised every day. And then people going in, their coffee is really expensive. And it's $5.30 for coffee. Yes. And I feel like this. God, it's really expensive for coffee.
Coffee shop was in Broadsheet recently because I was like, that's interesting. Coffee shop in Vermont. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really expensive. They make good coffee. Don't get me wrong. But actually, every day there's a lot of people. They really support the local, and then so I feel like it's for that experience and something changed me, and like this morning. And then I thought, I hasn't go out for a walk for a very long time. And then suddenly I feel, okay, I voted this morning. I thought, why not I just go out for a walk? And then when the time I walk, and then I thought, and I start to enjoy it. And then coming out, all this experience is coming back to me. And so I feel like if I got the same, and then I pretty confident some of the people, they will feel the same. And then about how we feel about the neighborhood, I guess it's just, and how we're going to, pay attention to it. And so I think the corner coffee shop and then is a very interesting experience to me. And then showing about the neighborhood and then how we support each other. Yeah.
It's so interesting you say that because I feel like when we opened up and came back to Linden, there were a couple of coffee shops around here where the baristas had a pretty cool attitude. And then after lockdown, they became so lovely because they just wanted their customers and everyone to be. I was like, oh, I feel like there's some benefits of that experience.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have an experience, have a question for Cyrus?
I'm wondering where this will take you now, Cyrus. You've got to this point with this work. Are you already working into the next phase of this? And are you willing to share what that is, what direction you're taking?
Actually, when the time all the work being mounted on the die bond, that is the new work that I make, and then in the last 9 months. And so I think when the time I did this series of photographs, I find out it's very fascinating about the abstract. Because the abstract and then it's opened up another world to me. Because it's like a fantasy and then nobody knows what it is. And that is the beauty about it. And then suddenly for the viewer, you start to making your own story. And so, and then I think my next stage is how far can I push from, because all these photographs is based on a realistic photograph. That is something I found that is very fascinating to me, in between the realistic and the abstract. And so, and I'm thinking about how far can I push, and then from the realistic and then towards the abstract world. And
it's a sharp edge, that representational or abstract. But that's what you seem to do. To stay on that edge all the time.
I really want to push and then to see it become more and more abstract, and then to see what is it coming out to be. And so that is, I find out is a little bit, I feel like the photograph can be a bit more interesting angle to us. And even though sometimes I do really miss the studio and then to make sculpture and then to doing the hand-on stuff. And that is my another thing is thinking about when the time I make this work, and I start to think about, can I combine the photograph together with my sculpture? And that is my another plan I'm thinking, and
Well,
want to
we'll
pay
wait
around.
with great excitement to see what you do.
Me too.
I've got one more question.
Hi, you talk about time in your work, right? So I want to know, like, roughly how much time do you put into one work, and how do you know when to stop?
How is going to stop? I think that is a very good question. And sometimes I find out it's very, some of the photograph actually, and then I pay around for many times. And then especially when the time you pay around on the computer, you feel like you never stop. And today you feel like, oh, that is good. And then the next day, what if I pay a little bit more? And then you just obsessed with the computer for another 6 hours and to continue to pay around. I guess it's, and so for this photograph, and then I feel like when the time is become like a little bit like a painting, and I feel like, oh, I'm getting into something. And then I feel like, oh, okay, and then maybe that is something interesting coming up. Sometimes I like to show it to my friends, like my art gang. They are my very good critique friends. And then sometimes I show it to them, and then to see what is the feedback, because I want to see a dialogue. I think it's through this kind of dialogue, and then you think about, oh, is it, can I stop here? And then, but I must say, in my past journey, sometimes I like to go back to revisit the work, because you might have, because sometimes you need to walk away from the work, and then you go back, and then you got a little bit more idea. And so at this point, I feel like it's finished. And then maybe 10 years back, and then I might go back and then to redo the whole work again. Is that make sense?
I'm just curious about
Yeah.
the process because,
Yeah.
you know, I'm actually engulfed by the work itself. That's why I'm here today. And I also feel that there is no ending to it.
Yes, I agree.
So that's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
I was curious,
Yeah.
where is the stopping point when you're obsessed with something so much and so passionate about, you know, discovering this whole thing, or it could be something, and when do you say, to pull on it and say, this is it, this is gonna be the artwork that call it, you know.
I think for this, yeah, I totally agree. For this point, I feel like we can put it up and ready to show, and just finish at this one, and then I might be one day I going back and then to retouch the whole body work and add a sculpture on the top. And so sometimes it's a little bit like a journey. You think about you're going to stop, oh, why not we just stop? And then to think a little bit more and take a deep breath, and then you move on. And so you might coming back and then to revisit again. Yeah.
And for me, I think having known your work for a little while, I look at knowing some of your ceramics or sculptural work, I look at some of the textures that it almost seems like a texture or an etching that you see on the surface of ceramics sometimes. So for me, there's this really like delectable sort of surface that I am really fascinated about. What's next? Like you've done us, tick. What's next?
Yeah, I got another project coming up, technically in next year, and yes, yeah, and I'm working on.
What it is though, can you
Yeah, because the contract hasn't arrived.
Once she's got the contract and signed it, post it on our social media. We're waiting for it.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us
Yeah.
this afternoon. Thank you, Cyrus.
Yeah,
It's
thank
so lovely to hear you
Yeah.
talk about your work.
Yeah.
It's such a privilege to show your work.
Oh,
It's such
thanks
an
for
incredible
having me.
body
Yeah.
of work, and I think it's been really interesting to watch people react to it and see people. As one person said to me, it really reaches in and touches my soul. And I stood there and I looked and I said, who'd have thought art could ever do that? And I think there's something really beautiful when you can achieve that for people. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you.